The border has shifted, not the line on the map, but the line of industrial dominance. $41 billion. That is the payload that just detonated in the Mexican economy. While Washington watched the Pacific, Mexico City secured the Atlantic. A strategic victory so absolute, it has left Texas policymakers paralyzed. The United States bid for the new manufacturing crown. They offered tax breaks, they offered political pressure, they offered the Made in USA brand, and they lost. Mexico didn't just win a factory, it captured the future of the North American supply chain. The Plan Mexico is no longer a theory, it is a tactical reality on the ground. Austin is in shock. Wall Street is rewriting its forecasts, and the global heavyweights of industry have chosen their new command center. This is not about cheap labor anymore. This is about high-tech sovereignty. This is about the nearshoring fortress. If you believe in the rise of a new industrial superpower, hit that like button now. We are tracking the money, the strategy, and the fallout. Welcome to the front line of the economic war. The battlefield is defined by concrete, steel, and fiber optics. To understand the magnitude of this victory, we must first inspect the weaponry Mexico has deployed. We are not talking about simple assembly lines from the 1990s. We are witnessing the activation of advanced industrial nodes capable of operating independently of external pressure. The Plan Mexico, activated and accelerated in late 2025, has transformed the Bajío and northern corridors into one of the most sophisticated manufacturing ecosystems on the planet. This is a structural revolution. The data confirms that foreign direct investment has shattered the $40 billion ceiling. A figure that was deemed impossible by analysts just 24 months ago. But the raw number is less important than the type of capital securing the terrain. We are seeing a massive influx of Level 4 automation technology, robotics, AI-driven logistics, and precision engineering assets that were previously the exclusive domain of Germany, Japan, and the United States. The centerpiece of this arsenal is the new grid of sovereign industrial parks. These are not merely rented warehouses. They are fortified economic zones designed with energy autonomy in mind. The federal government's push for energy sovereignty has dovetailed with private sector needs, creating manufacturing hubs that generate their own power, recycle their own water, and connect directly to the modernized rail arteries. This infrastructure is the shield that protects the investment from global volatility. Look at the logistics corridors. The expansion of the Puerto del Norte in Matamoros is a tactical masterstroke by bypassing the congested and expensive U.S. ports. Mexico has created a direct injection point for raw materials coming from Asia and Europe. This port does not just move containers. It moves strategic independence. It allows Mexican factories to source components without asking for permission from Texas or California regulators. The automotive sector has evolved into a Titan-class asset. We are no longer just assembling doors and engines. The new plants, specifically those secured in the recent bidding wars against U.S. states, are casting the core components of the electric future batteries, semiconductors, and electric drive units. These are the strategic minerals of the 21st century economy. Possession of these production lines is equivalent to possessing oil refineries in the 20th century. This arsenal creates a gravitational pull when a region secures the production of the brain of the vehicle, the microchips and software, and the heart of the vehicle, the battery pack. The body, the assembly, has no choice but to follow. Mexico has effectively locked down the critical path of the supply chain. The U.S. investment bid failed because they were trying to buy the body while Mexico had already secured the heart and brain. The scale of the construction is staggering. Satellite imagery over Nuevo, Leon, and San Luis Potosi reveals a density of industrial roofing that rivals the Pearl River Delta in China. But unlike China, this fortress is inside the North American trade perimeter. It is the Trojan horse of efficiency, fully compliant with trade deals, yet fully sovereign in its operation. This is the arsenal that defeated the U.S. bid. The victory over the U.S. investment bid was not an accident. It was a result of superior economic intelligence. The Mexican strategic planners detected a critical vulnerability in the American approach long before the negotiations became public. They understood that the United States was paralyzed by its own political contradictions, caught between a desire for green energy and a trade war with the suppliers of that energy technology. Intelligence analysis reveals that Mexico identified the decoupling dilemma. The U.S. wants to decouple from Asian supply chains, but U.S. manufacturers cannot survive without Asian components. Mexico stepped into this gap with surgical precision. The strategy was active neutrality. By refusing to pick a side in the geopolitical shouting match, Mexico positioned itself as the only safe harbor for global capital. The detection of the Texas weakness was crucial. Mexican negotiators realized that while Texas could offer tax breaks, they could not offer trade immunity. A factory in Texas is subject to every whim of Washington's tariff policy. A factory in Mexico, protected by the USMCA and Mexico's vast network of other trade treaties, offers a backdoor to the global market. This was the leverage point. We must analyze the role of the economic diplomatic corps. These were not just bureaucrats. They operated like special forces in boardrooms across Shanghai, Seoul, and Munich. They sold Mexico not as a cheap option, but as the stable option. They presented data showing that U.S. labor shortages were structural and permanent, while Mexico's demographic dividend was entering its prime. The intelligence gathered on the electric vehicle EV sector was decisive. The Mexican government understood that the legacy auto brands in the U.S. were struggling to pivot, while the new energy giants from Asia were desperate for a North American foothold. Mexico quietly signaled that it would not block these investments, creating a sanctuary for advanced EV technology. This was a calculated risk that paid off. While Washington was busy writing regulations to exclude certain batteries, Mexico was busy writing contracts to build the factories that make them. This speed of decision-making, the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide. Active economic policy was faster in Mexico City than in D.C. The Mexican apparatus detected the shifting winds of the 2026 USMCA review and moved to create facts on the ground before the review could take place. The trap set for the U.S. bid was psychological. The U.S. assumed that proximity to their market gave them the right to dictate terms. They assumed that Mexico would simply accept a subordinate role. Mexican intelligence exploited this arrogance. They offered the global investors something the U.S. could not: sovereignty over their own operations. Free from the threat of national security seizures or sudden policy reversals, the signal interception in this economic war involved monitoring the panic in U.S. supply chains. When U.S. companies began complaining about the cost of reshoring to the Midwest, Mexico was there with the nearshoring plus solution. They didn't just offer land, they offered an integrated ecosystem. They turned the U.S. desire for security against them, proving that the most secure supply chain was one located in a friendly, neutral, and efficient Mexico. The timeline of this collision is critical. It began in early 2024, but the decisive engagement occurred in the last 2 quarters of 2025. This was the period known as the bidding war of the century. The target? A massive, multi-billion-dollar manufacturing complex for next-generation electric mobility, a gigafactory in everything but name. Q1 2025. The opening salvo, the investors, a consortium of global tech and automotive giants, announced the search for a North American headquarters. The shortlist is predictable: Texas, Tennessee, and northern Mexico. The governor of Texas immediately launches a media offensive, promising zero corporate taxes and expedited permits. The narrative in the U.S. press is that this is a done deal. Texas is the heavyweight. Mexico is the backup plan. Q2 2025, the Mexican counter-maneuver. While Texas holds press conferences, Mexican officials hold closed-door technical summits. They don't talk about taxes. They talk about water, electricity, and human capital. They present the planned Mexico incentives, specific guarantees on energy prices, and a fast-track visa program for specialized engineers. They deploy the cluster strategy, showing the investors that their suppliers are already in Mexico. This is the first hit. The investors realize that moving to Texas means importing parts from Mexico. The turning point, the tariff threat. Mid-2025. Rumors swirl in Washington about new, draconian tariffs on imported machinery. The investors panic. A factory in Texas that relies on imported robotics suddenly looks like a financial black hole. Mexico strikes. They guarantee stability under existing international law. They demonstrate that machinery imported into Mexican free trade zones is exempt from the Washington chaos. The U.S. bid starts to bleed. Q3 2025. The siege of Austin. The negotiation teams are deadlocked. Texas increases its offer, throwing state funds at the project. It reeks of desperation. Meanwhile, Mexico plays its ace card, the Pacific Bridge. They demonstrate that the logistics cost of bringing raw lithium and steel through Mexican ports is 30% cheaper than routing it through Long Beach or Houston. The math begins to overwhelm the politics. The critical 48 hours, late 2025. The board of directors meets in a neutral location. The U.S. delegation presents a glossy vision of Made in America. The Mexican delegation places a single document on the table: the execution timeline. It shows that the Mexican plant can be operational in 18 months. The Texas plan, bogged down by local zoning laws and labor shortages, is estimated at 36 months. In the high-speed world of tech, 18 months is an eternity. The kill shot, the final decision, is leaked. Mexico wins. The announcement is succinct. Due to superior logistical integration, labor availability, and strategic certainty, the primary manufacturing hub will be established in Mexico. The silence in Austin is deafening. The U.S. bid is not just beaten. It is dismantled on technical grounds. The aftermath? The Texas shock. This is where the title of our briefing comes into play. Texas is shocked not just by the loss, but by the consequence. The investors inform Texas that they will still need a facility there, but only for warehousing and distribution. The factory expansion in Texas is forced to proceed, but it is a hollow victory. They are building a garage for the cars made in Mexico. The high-value jobs, the engineering, the robotics, they stay south of the Rio Grande. The real-time reaction. As the news hits the wires, the Mexican peso rallies. Wall Street analysts scramble to upgrade their ratings on Mexican industrial REITs, real estate investment trusts. The shock spreads to other U.S. states. If Texas, the most business-friendly state in the Union, cannot beat Mexico, who can? The realization sets in. The center of gravity has shifted. We must now assess the casualty count and the new strategic map. The defeat of the U.S. investment bid is a watershed moment for national sovereignty. It proves that a nation does not need to be a superpower to win. It needs to be smart, agile, and focused. The soldo balance sheet of this operation is overwhelmingly positive for the Mexican state. Financial assets secured. Over $40 billion in FDI is not just cash. It is capital infrastructure that cannot be moved. These factories are now permanent fixtures of the Mexican landscape. Strategic depth. Mexico has diversified its portfolio. It is no longer dependent solely on U.S. companies. It is now the host of a world parliament of manufacturing, with capital from Asia, Europe, and the Americas, all anchored in Mexican soil. The Texas factory expansion serves as a permanent monument to this victory. Every time a truck pulls into that Texas distribution center, it is carrying goods that generated wealth, tax revenue, and technological know-how in Mexico. The U.S. has effectively been relegated to the role of consumer, while Mexico has ascended to the role of producer. This reality forces a revaluation of the North American fortress. The fortress is no longer commanded solely from Washington. Mexico has earned its rank as a co-commander of the plan. Mexico has demonstrated that economic defense is the best offense. By strengthening its own internal market and industrial base, Mexico has immunized itself against the bullying tactics of larger economies. The message to the Mexican people is one of discipline and pride. This victory was not a gift. It was engineered by thousands of engineers, workers, and strategists who refused to accept the narrative of inferiority. The factories rising in the desert are the cathedrals of the modern era. They are the proof that when the law is defended and the strategy is sound, the developing nation can outmaneuver the developed one. But the alert level remains high. Success breeds envy. The response from the north will be fierce. We can expect tighter border inspections, renewed political rhetoric, and legal challenges to the USMCA. The sovereignty gained today must be defended tomorrow. The industrial zones must be kept secure from crime, corruption, and espionage. The enemy, chaos, and illegality is always waiting for a moment of weakness. The horizon is clear, but storm clouds are gathering. Mexico has won the battle for the factory, but the war for the supply chain is eternal. The focus must now shift to education training, the next generation to run these advanced systems. We have the hardware, now we need the software, the human mind. This is the state of play. The investment is secured. The factory is ours. The shock is theirs. Stand ready. The Industrial Revolution is here, and it speaks Spanish. Over and out. To fully appreciate the scope of this defeat for the U.S. bid, we must zoom in on the granular details of the logistics network that made it possible. The defeat was not achieved in a vacuum. It was the result of decades of preparation, meeting a sudden window of opportunity. Consider the interoceanic corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec CIIT. While the world was fixated on the drought issues at the Panama Canal, Mexico was quietly operationalizing a dry canal. This asset was a key selling point in the negotiations. The ability to move containers from the Pacific to the Atlantic by rail in under 10 hours gave the investors a plan B for global shipping that Texas simply could not match. Texas has the Gulf, but it does not have the Pacific. Mexico has both. The rail sovereignty factor cannot be overstated. The consolidation of the railway system under state guidance ensured that the new factory would have priority access to the tracks. In the U.S., the investors faced a fragmented rail network owned by private monopolies with a history of bottlenecks. Mexico offered a streamlined, security-centric rail plan. The investors bought the green light on the tracks. The human intel factor. Let's debrief on the human intelligence aspect. The U.S. bid failed because it underestimated the Mexican engineer. For years, the narrative was that Mexico offered hands. The reality, revealed during the technical audits of the bidding process, was that Mexico offered minds. The Tec de Monterrey and IPN National Polytechnic Institute. Graduates were pitted against graduates from U.S. technical colleges. The investors found that the Mexican engineers were not only technically equal but were more adaptable and bilingual, and crucially hungry for innovation. The Texas expansion shock is partly a shock of realizing that the talent pool in the U.S. is shallowing out, while in Mexico, it is deepening. The demographic shield protected Mexico. The U.S. is an aging society. The average age of a skilled welder in the U.S. is over 55. In Mexico, it is under 30. When you are building a factory meant to run for 40 years, you don't bet on a workforce that is retiring in 5. You bet on the workforce that is just starting. This actuarial fact was the silent killer of the U.S. bid. The energy sovereignty matrix. We must re-examine the energy component. The media often portrays Mexico's energy policy as controversial. However, to the industrial strategist, it represented certainty. The U.S. grid, particularly in Texas, has suffered catastrophic failures during winter storms and heat waves due to deregulation and lack of winterization. The Great Freeze of 2021 was fresh in the investors' minds. Mexico guaranteed a baseload security. The state-owned utility CFE committed 2 dedicated transmission lines for the new sovereign industrial parks. The promise was simple: the lights will not go out. In a gigafactory, a 5-second power outage can cost millions and ruin silicon wafers or halted assembly lines. Mexico sold reliability over the volatile spot market pricing of the Texas grid. The geopolitical immunity. The shock in the title also refers to the geopolitical shock. By choosing Mexico, the investors effectively immunized their capital. If they had built in the U.S., their assets would be political pawns in every election cycle. A new administration could cancel subsidies or impose new mandates overnight. In Mexico, the investment is protected by the rigidity of international treaties. It is harder for Washington to sanction a factory in Mexico, a vital ally, than a factory in China, or even to regulate a factory in a rival U.S. state. Mexico serves as a Switzerland of manufacturing, a neutral ground where business can be done regardless of who sits in the White House.